Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. This is episode 37. Thanks all of you who have entered our contest, and especially those who have watched and liked and subscribed to us on YouTube. And we're glad to have with us now who told one of the great stories of all time on this episodes months ago. I can't even remember when. But he's a great friend. He's one of the top journalists in the business, has been for years, national correspondent, Daily Racing Form. We've worked together at ESPN and NBC. Somewhere in Southern California, we connect now with Jay Privman. Jay, welcome back to the show.
Kenny, it's my pleasure. How are you?
I'm good, my friend. You were on one of the early shows with us. You told the great story about having lunch with Liz Taylor. That's still like a favorite on this.
Yeah, that was the Cliff Notes version of that is that Marge Everett, who owned Hollywood Park at the time, was trying to curry favor with me, and she invited me to have lunch in the Turf Club one day, and unbeknownst to me, when I showed up at the table, also joining us for lunch was Liz Taylor. So it was pretty funny.
I mean, this is the Jay Thomas meets the Lone Ranger that he always told Letterman on Christmas time. I love that. So I heard it all the time. I said, Jay Privman is the only person I know that actually met Liz Taylor.
And she couldn't have been nicer. I mean, it was just, this is 30 years ago or so, but it was when this happened. So it was pretty fun. And it was completely out of the blue and unexpected. It was just a great sort of Marge Everett of like, you think you're just coming to have lunch with me to talk about Hollywood Park? Oh, I'm going to raise the stakes here far beyond what you imagined.
Oh, that's just great. And now segueing into raising the stakes with the Breeders' Cup a month away. And do we have any clear picture after Code of Honor makes wins over the weekend? McKenzie gets upset over the weekend. Do we have a clear-cut picture of this Horse of the Year race and the way the Breeders' Cup Classic's shaping up, Jay?
Well, the Classic itself, I think, is a really interesting race, Kenny, because as you mentioned, McKenzie got beat in the Awesome again the other day, and I still think he's the tepid favorite for the race, but he's never won at a mile and a quarter, which is the Breeders' Cup's distance. And Code of Honor has won 2 straight at a mile and a quarter, the Travers and then the Jockey Club Gold Cup. They're still on the fence as to whether they're going to come out for the Breeders' Cup. I hope they do. I think it would make it very interesting. And there's a real good chance that the mare Elate, who's running at Keeneland in the Spinster for her final prep, could run in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And I think that would really spice the race up. But one horse that I know for sure will be in the race is from the East Coast is Vino Rosso, who won the Gold Cup at Santa Anita earlier this year, and then got taken down in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. So it's still a really interesting race, I think. Yeah,
I was trying to think of, obviously last year there was, maybe one other horse in the mix, but I mean, it was all about Justify, and just like with Pharaoh in 15, and, there's some years that stand out where this horse is probably going to be at. But I think it's really interesting that like Bricks and Mortar, you'd have put him in the mix. Midnight Bijou, can you win just by beating the fillies? I don't know. Can we be like the Lady's Secret of this year? If something crazy happened in the Classic, do you see any other scenarios out there when you talk Horse of the Year?
Well, certainly Bricks and Mortar is a viable candidate right now. The interesting thing with him is that he's probably best from a mile and an eighth to a mile and a quarter, and there's no Breeders' Cup race that falls into that. So do you shorten him up to a mile, which is what they're going to do, or stretch him out to a mile and a half, which is what they've decided is not in his best interest. So he's going to go in the mile grass race, and certainly if he wins, he'd have a terrific record and would be a very strong candidate for Horse of the Year. You mentioned Midnight Bijou, who's undefeated this year, but she's only run against fillies and mares, and she is going to continue that march in the Breeders' Cup when competing in the distaff. And I think for her to be Horse of the Year, you have to have a pretty chaotic Breeders' Cup day, because usually voters don't go for horses who run just in a restricted race like that all year long. But there's certainly precedent for it. When Azeri was Horse of the Year, it was a year when there was just a chaotic Breeders' Cup result, including Volponi with the big upset in the Classic that year. The year that Lady's Secret was Horse of the Year after winning the distaff, at least earlier that year, she had run and beaten males a couple of times. So she had that on her resume. The one other horse, Kenny, who I think has a real big chance to be Horse of the Year, again, depending on how the results go on Breeders' Cup weekend, is the horse who won the Met Mile for Steve Asmussen, Matoli, who's
Matoli.
just had a terrific year, a number of Grade 1 wins, and he's going to run in the sprint. But he did win as far as a mile in the Met Mile, and I think, for instance, if he were to win and Bricks and Mortar got beat and there was a big upset in the Classic and maybe Midnight Bijou lost as well, there's scenarios where you get to Matoli being Horse of the Year. So those are some of the horses I think are in play for that honor right now.
Yeah, Matoli, beat McKenzie. I mean, this is it's happened before, but it's been a while, I think, since it's been this many scenarios, like you say. You can start laying them out. What if this Bricks and Mortar doesn't win, Midnight Bijou doesn't win, something crazy happens, and you have another Valponi wins the Classic. I think it's just going to make it fun. I think it's really could be one of the fun Breeders' Cups in a long time with all the things in play.
I agree. I think the racing is going to be very, very good, and it's always fun when you get the 2-year-olds and the grass races and the Europeans who ship in. So, and there's the setting is certainly pretty spectacular when you're at Santa Anita.
And I'm glad it's at Santa Anita. We've said that on this show. I think it would have been just so confusing to the general public to not, if they'd pulled it from Santa Anita. It'd be like saying the Yankees can't be in the Yankees had a great record, but they can't play at the stadium this year. They're going to have to play their games at they're going to have to finish it up at Fenway Park in the playoffs. To me, with the great tradition of Santa Anita, I'm glad they gave them the vote of confidence.
They certainly did that, and there have been protocols put in place at Santa Anita since all the issues that they had earlier this year that I think is, I think you could make the compelling case right now that the safest place to race in the country is at Santa Anita.
Yeah, I think you can. And you know what's interesting to me during all this is when we're going into the Triple Crown, and I was talking to a friend of mine, Chuck Culpepper, I think writes for the Washington Post, and he was talking about Santa Anita, and we know all the issues, the problems going on. Then I said, yeah, but isn't it interesting? Now, again, this is pre-Derby. I said, Baffert's got 3 horses, and Omaha Beach was still healthy. I said, you probably got the top 4 3-year-olds are all coming from Santa Anita.
And to that point, I mean, going on this fall, those horses like McKenzie, like Omaha Beach, they're training regularly at Santa Anita. Hall of Fame trainers like Baffert, Mandela, they're giving that track a vote of confidence every day with the horses that they have stabled there and that they've worked there.
How's Omaha Beach doing, by the way, Jay?
Well, he's supposed to run in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship. As you know, he's had a number of hiccups on the comeback trail. He was going to run at Del Mar for his first comeback race, and then he got sick, and that had to be scrapped. And then it looked like he was going to come to Churchill Downs, and that didn't work out. And now they've had to really just sort of back up and decide, well, we're going to sprint him in the 6-furlong Santa Anita Sprint Championship, and then go on from there. I don't know if he would come back in the sprint itself on Breeders' Cup Day or go out to the dirt mile, but the Classic is just not really an option at this point based on the what's happened in terms of his training preparation since he's gone back into training.
Talking with Jay Privman, award-winning journalist, national correspondent for the Daily Racing Form. You know him, you love him. He's written some terrific books, by the way, including one on the history of the Breeders' Cup that I still have, that I just think is a great read. And there's so much history now with the Breeders' Cup. You start thinking about this is the race that like you and I kind of grew up with. I really wasn't around when Aristides won the Derby, contrary to popular belief. So I kind of missed out on the start of that Triple Crown, but I remember well at Hollywood Park, I was watching on TV in '84, and Jay's close personal friend Liz Taylor was there, and Fred Astaire, I believe, was, and pretty much Hollywood was there. And of course, it closed out with like as good a race. It was a Hollywood ending, wasn't it? When Wild Again comes squeezing through there and wins the Classic. I thought it just made the whole, from day one, it just went great for the Breeders' Cup.
It's been just a great event. You're right from the start, and the Wild Again one was. You're right. That was a great story because you remember he was a big long shot, and yet the people who owned him put up $360,000 to supplement him to the race against the likes of Slew of Gold and Gate Dancer, and they won at 31-1 with Pat Day riding. And from the very first Breeders' Cup race, Kenny, that year was the Juvenile, and Chief's Crown won it. And when you had a horse of that quality right from the start winning, And I remember I've been at every Breeders' Cup, and I remember you didn't really know what to expect at the Breeders' Cup. And that first year, there were 7 races, and to see horses of that quality run, and then a half hour later again, and again and again, it was like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
Yeah. And it was, and it still is. Although sometimes, every now and then, I got to be honest. We're doing the 2 live shows on Friday and on Saturday. You go, oh, wait a minute now. Which race is coming up? Because you had it down. I remember when they added in '99, when they added one more race at which was the first one I did for NBC. That's why I remember it specifically at Gulfstream. They added that 8th race. I thought, wow, 8 races. That's something. Wonder if they'll ever go to 9 races. And then of course.
Yep, and now we're up to 14 over 2 days. It's really a great festival. And I like the way they've done it now with having all the 2-year-old races on Friday. You can really just sort of focus on the stars of the future. It's a really smart way, I think, to package the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, I do too, and I'm glad they call it the Distaff again, which they went back to a few years ago.
Yes.
I was calling it the Distaff when it wasn't the Distaff anymore, but they kept me on the air because it's just a classic. It's a classic name, right? The Distaff. You know what it is.
That's what it is. It's not the Ladies Classic.
Yeah, it's not the Ladies Classic. That sounds like a golf tournament.
Exactly. The Dinosaur Ladies.
The Dinosaur. Did you ever interview Dinosaur?
I never interviewed Dinosaur.
I used to watch her show. I remember the Dinosaur show. God, that was TV, wasn't it? They just don't have people. Young kids out there, you don't know nothing about entertainment.
Yeah, you probably watched that. Mike Douglas, right? You watched all the...
Listen, Mike Douglas was great, wasn't he? Merv Griffin, I did interview Merv Griffin. I know you did, too. He was a big horse guy.
At Hollywood Park.
Yeah, and I got to meet him a couple of times. What a nice man, and has some great stories. And, yeah, you'd watch Mike Douglas. And remember Mike Douglas had... I know it's a horse racing show, Jay. I swear we're getting back to it in just a minute. But I remember when Mike Douglas had on John and Yoko.
Oh my God!
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but I'm sure I could find it on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm gonna check on that and make sure I'm right. Yeah, it's Mike Douglas. Because I remember my cousins. I was actually a little too young for the Beatles, but I remember when my cousins were telling me, they said, "Hey, John Lennon's gonna be on Mike Douglas." They thought, they were against the establishment, hang the rich and all that stuff. But then when Mike Douglas goes on, John, and that's it. Yeah, 1972. Sorry, 72. I just looked it up. 1972. You can look it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
I am gonna watch it when we're done here. That's great.
See, that's why we get it. And that's what I like about Jay, because he can just roll with it, which is what's great for horse racing. It's because, there's a lot of things happening out there that's kind of fun, isn't there? That, and you look at all the people that come in, look at all the entertainment people that are in horse racing.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, they love it. Right now, I think the most prominent celebrity would be somebody like Bobby Flay, who everybody knows, extremely popular and successful chef, and owns racehorses, loves the game, has been a featured speaker at the Hall of Fame. He's to have somebody like that among so many other types of celebrities, but to have somebody like that involved in the game just is terrific.
Yeah, and Mel Brooks still comes to the racetrack.
Yes, he is. And he is as nice a person as you could, and approachable as you could ever meet. He's just a wonderful man.
And a genius. I mean, the movie. See, that was like growing up. I grew up with that whole string that he had in there. The Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles and all that. It was just. My goodness. Well, first off, I got to be honest. Our listening audience is not generally 20 years old on this show, okay? We've done some research. So it skews much like horse racing itself to a little bit older. So there'll be people that know who Mel Brooks are that are listening.
So they probably watch Blazing Saddles.
They probably watch Blazing
Saddles. And know who Cleavon Little is.
They would know Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder. They would know all this stuff, see? Last week I had a comment about Taylor Swift. And, fortunately, I'm still holding up okay. I just said I'd like to know for sure if she decided, did she give in to the pressure of PETA to bypass the Melbourne Cup, or did she really have a conflict in, her tour in Asia? That's all. And I thought the Breeders' Cup people should swoop in and take Taylor and her entourage to the Breeders' Cup. That would be so cool, wouldn't it? Hey, if you're available, come to the Breeders' Cup. Take care of you and set you up and take a look at horse racing before you listen to all the outside people telling you about the sport.
I think not just for Taylor Swift, but I think just in general, racing needs to do a better job of educating people as to all the good things that go on in the sport.
Yeah, I mean, well said. And that's because, as we know, and we know the people get involved. And like I said, I don't know anyone that's ever, I'm not saying it's never happened. I don't know anyone that ever mistreated a horse. First off, that's the livelihood of the whole barn, of the people that work in the barn, not just the trainer, not just the owner, the jockeys. I mean, there's nobody goes out there and says, I want to harm an animal. Everybody I know in horse racing, they love animals, not just horses, but generally animal lovers are attracted to horse racing.
No, like I think you put it best there when you said it's their livelihood. I mean, they're not going to harm the very essence of what makes them, of what gives them a job.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that got lost, and you're right. I think sometimes the public relations standpoint, I had Tom Lute on, I guess it was last week, we were talking, I said, in some ways a Dana White guy should be like commissioner for a year in horse racing and just say, we're not apologizing for this. Come out and look at our sport. Well, you keep picking on us. Maybe eliminate some curse words.
Do a better job of that.
Yeah. It's a tough world out there, as we know. Producers and editors, we know it's a tough world. Geez, some of my best stuff's been cut. You know that. It's good. That was such a good story. What is going to be the biggest story this year going into the Breeders' Cup that Jay Privman's going to be covering for the Racing Forum?
Just in terms of racing itself, it'll be the Classic, and just what a terrific wide open race it is. And I'm really hoping Elate runs well in the Spinster and goes on to the Classic. I think that would spice the race up. And Mackenzie's a terrific story. He's named for a gentleman who was a very close friend of trainer Bob Baffert's. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was a longtime racing executive at Los Alamitos, Brad Mackenzie, but Bob went to the University of Arizona with him. Bob's late mother always referred to him as the son she never had, or the extra son that she never had. Yeah. And I think you'd see a very emotional response out of Bob Baffert and the people connected with Mackenzie if he were to win the Classic.
Yeah, and the great friendship that Bob's had with, not just all the owner, but especially with Mike Pegram too, who's involved in that.
Yes, exactly.
That's when I first met those guys, when they won with 30 slews the sprint at the Breeders' Cup, like 92, I think it was.
It was 92, exactly.
Yeah, so that was the first time I crossed in. And will there be a lot of stories on Santa Anita, do you think? I mean, I know there's going to be some. Will the LA Times just have a story every day on it?
I mean, I don't know about every day, but it is a legitimate news story as to what's gone on this year at Santa Anita, and I'm certain that's why when I was answering your question before, I said in terms of racing, and I was talking about the Classic, but I think in terms of just stories, I mean, that will be for, I think, most news publications that and or radio or TV that cover the event, that is a significant aspect of this year's Breeders' Cup, is what has transpired at Santa Anita this calendar year and the things that have been done to make improvements at Santa Anita and in California in general, which had a Del Mar meeting, for instance, in which there were 0 racing fatalities. Right. There are things that are being done here that I think are going to be embraced by the entire sport, and it'll make things better. And that is the kind of message that racing needs to be getting out as we lead up to the Breeders' Cup.
Jay, before I let you go, something else very important. What about the LA Kings this year as the puck gets ready to drop on a new season?
Well, Kenny, as you know, I'm a longtime fan of the Kings. They've won 2 Stanley Cups, but realistically, the lineup that they have this year does not look like one that's going to be able to get them to the playoffs. I think we're playing more for a lottery pick than we are for a playoff spot. So I remain hopeful but realistic.
And the Dodgers, is this the year?
Boy, they've got all the tools to do it. They've had a great season. We'll see if they can finally get over the hump for the first time in 30 some odd years. It's been a long drought for them, but they've certainly got the personnel to pull it off.
You know who else I could talk in horse racing about the Breeders' Cup Classic, and Mel Brooks and Mike Douglas and John Lennon and Merv Griffin and the Kings and the Dodgers and Elizabeth Taylor. Nobody but Jay Privman. I'm telling you, that's true. Jay, my friend, thanks so much. I look forward to seeing you in California in a few weeks.
I can't wait. It's always fun doing stuff like this with you, Kenny. I just really enjoy your company, whether it's in person or doing a podcast like this.
Well, you're a great friend, and I really appreciate it, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny.
We'll have more on the Horse Racing Show right after this.